We have top 4 out of the YCS, some interesting little plant stuff out of Top Cut as well. This was by far one of the most interesting YCS top cuts that I think I've seen to date with tech choices. Don't beg 30% of you that have not smashed the living crap out of that subscribe button. Smash it so you guys don't miss out on more awesome content. Now, the first list you're going to be looking at here is an extra deckless version of Floowandereeze. Now, this is actually kind of an interesting take because once you strip out the extra deck for this deck, you don't have to worry about Unicorn taking away unnecessary outs. Now, by doing so, you do lose access to things like Pot of Extravagance and Pot of Prosperity, but this ends up rounding out your matchups a little bit more consistently, I feel like. Especially, you know, when you're playing against Kash Tierra. I mean, this deck did make top 4. Like you do have to put in some consideration here that this was a successful factor because of that. In place, I mean, you get access to Talents, Thrust. You also have Evenlies here. But this is one of the first times in, honestly, modern era history here where you see something with an extra deck, or without an extra deck, actually functioning and doing well. It's almost like you could play Domain in Floowandereeze. Gosh, imagine being able to Domain lock your opponent with like an M-Pen face up. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with this deck in terms of building. I mean, you actually had the double unexplored wins. You had one Jack in the hand. It's very interesting to see. And of course, we have the Snell in here as well. I know a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, Snell see in play. Yeah, same thing with Darkstone Morgan, Royal Decree carrying this build all the way to top finish. All right, third place here is, yes, this is Kash Tierra Runick. Now, before you're like, how in the world does this work? Well, this is a beautiful showcase of how absurdly good Fountain is as a card. And yes, you can generate advantage through this stuff, but like, you got to remember that you want cards to be able to draw. You have equalizing options in the form of evenly matched. Thank you for being such a good generic card at the end of the day. But the biggest things to really take into mind there are, well, obviously generic cards will always carry you. And you would think that there would be a high level of confliction amongst this stuff, but there really isn't. I mean, you have interruption plays through these, and I mean, honestly, both of these will get you a lot of options that you might not really consider. You just got to control like your battle phase to make sure that if you're using this, that you would need to, because remember, these will always skip your next, or the battle phase. So you got to be very wary of when to trigger them where, you know, or trigger them during main phase 2, so you'll lose your next phase, depending. Also, I mean, Dracossack's a pretty cool card in this deck. Honestly, I think a lot of the cool resource generation that this particular hybrid actually has is very, very interesting. I didn't think we would see anybody try out this build. I'd heard things that people were trying it, but this was definitely the sauce out of the YCS. Next up here was Naturia Runick. Now, you're going to see a little bit of the same thing here. You're going to just see how busted Fountain is. Once again, Fountain's entire job is to facilitate a endless resource pool for this deck that you start milling out your opponent. And the fact that all of these give you resources to start synchroing with is what really puts this deck over the edge. It's not the fact that, like, you can mill your opponent out, or, you know, the draw 3 helps a lot, but it's the creation of the synchro monsters, you know, like a Chang Ying to banish, an interruption through a Naturia Beast, you know, same thing with the Barkion here, you know, draw power off of the Coral Dragon, plus, you know, a pop, or, you know, even so far as to be able to climb up into a Baron here to further disrupt the opponent. That's really, like I said, the things that pushes this deck over the edge that makes it such a terrifying competitor out here. Also, shout out to this card. This card did so much work this weekend. So many players tossed this card aside and were like, we're not going to play this. Card is garbage. While that seemed very, very true with a lot of the early testing phases, this YCS definitely showcased a lot of the power that we had, I guess, come to miss with this card. One feature match just, oh my gosh, sent this card rolling. And winning the event here was basic Kash Tierra here. I will tell you, out of all of the Kash Tierra builds, the more that we've seen in terms of developments, a lot of the builds feel completely the same. One big thing I do want to point out here, there is no evenly matched in this build. Duelist opted to not even deal with that. On the regional circuit as of late, we were starting to notice that there was a major uptick here in evenly matched across a lot of the main decks here, just because, you know, you could toggle thrust to search it. As you see, we're not even playing thrust, we're just opting for the talents here. So in terms of the list shifting back, we're also actually back on the Nightmare Corrupt Ridleys. So a lot of the more tech choices that we were seeing on that regional level look like they've been scrapped out, and we went just for more of the modern, well, I guess the older tech choices. So I guess it goes to prove that, like, old reliable still actually is reliable in terms of getting the job done out here. But in terms of the rest of the deck, I don't see anything. Gamma and Driver saw a huge amount of play this weekend. They were starting to gain play the last couple of regional weekends. I do think that these cards are crazy good just for what they can do to your opponent. Also, shout out here to Dark Row No More for being an absolutely cracked counter card. So outside of that, looks pretty good to me. Next up was a top 8 Rikka Sunavalon deck. Or, yeah, just Rikka. I cannot tell you the last time that we saw plant stuff actually showing up. And I see here that we actually have triple copies of Rose Arch. When your opponent activates a trap card and you control a plant monster, quick effect, send this card from your hand to the graveyard to negate the activation of destroy that card. I forgot that plants actually had a hand trap for a trap card. That is cracked. What? Okay, so I particularly understand why this deck got the chance to make its way up to the top. We are playing one Sunvine Maiden here, I assume for the interaction off of the Dryas here. But to be honest with you, how much out of the plant good stuff really has changed all that much? I mean, you strip out your Sunavalon package, you can make things a little bit more consistent. You can shift up and play the Thorion package in the deck as well. It's going to come down to, once again, I mean, like, what you want to adjust. I mean, this build is opting to play the one Boreas, but that's fine because it's a plant extender, you know? But if you strip out, like, the Disc Coliseum, you strip out, like, the Regulus, yeah, you do lose, you know, the Omni potential, but, like, that doesn't hurt all that much. And then, for the first time in quite some time, actually seeing triple Lonefire blossom. I think Lonefire in a lot of these builds is usually just a one of, kind of like a little starter, so you could do the thing. So actually seeing a little bit more reliability on this, and of course focusing back here on Droll and Lockbird for the value train. All right, next up here we have Sword Soul. Sword Soul did not have a good weekend. I'm going to be upfront honest with you. This deck really cried. I know a lot of people were like, yeah, Sword Soul's still a top contender. To a degree, I think so. This build opted very, very, very heavily here to focus on thrust, which was very, very nice. I also got to give a shout out here to Team Endgame from Jet. Jet was like, Robbie, I'm not playing cubics anymore. I was like, no. Our residential cubic expert, you might remember way back on this channel, actually stepped up to play this build this weekend. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Goes to show that players want to try out different ideas, and that's perfectly fine. Honestly, seeing a Bysteel package down here is also still kind of strong. Once again, you got a lot of good options floating around for you here, a lot of good showcasing. Also, shout out to Change of Heart here. Wish we had Zeus, but we can't really afford it. And then last as we have here is another version of Cash Money dollar bills. This build's opting for the books and lances for defensive options. We are playing, of course, Pot of Prosperity with good old Goliath down here to toggle. And this is what I was talking about. One evenly matched in the main deck. Just one. We don't even have a way to thrust for it. I love these little options where they're like, I think we can tack in like a one of here and get away with it. It's always just interesting to see the ideas that people bring to the table here. So overall, not a bad weekend. There's so much more info that is going to come out I'm trying to stay on top of this as much as I can for the more interesting deck list, in my personal opinion, but be patient. We'll see what more comes. So please, leave a comment down below, tell me what you guys think, and I'll see your beautiful faces back here later in the day, guys. Peace. Patrons, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos.